Howling in the Wind. Episode 3. The bones beneath rain lashes against the hull of the Astra 9. The ship sits hidden between the ruins of collapsed towers while Earth groans around it like something alive. Nobody sleeps. Not after what they saw. Not after Mandy's son. Morning, Julie stands near the observation window, clutching a warm drink she hasn't touched. Outside, shadows move through the distant streets below. Too organized to be animals. Matt works silently beside her, trying to repair damaged scanners. They circled the ship all night, he mutters. Julie looks uneasy. Why didn't they attack? Matt hesitates. That's what worries me. Across the cabin, Mandy sits wrapped in a blanket, staring at the pendant in her hand. She hasn't spoken since the tunnels. Jilly approaches carefully. You should rest. Mandy shakes her head instantly. That was my son. No one argues, because deep down, they all know she's right. Dan's suspicion. Dan enters the cockpit where George studies old Earth maps alone. You lied to us. George doesn't even turn around. Careful. You knew those things existed. George finally faces him. Calm, dangerous. I knew there might be survivors. Those aren't survivors. George steps closer. They are what survived. Dan's jaw tightens. You're hiding something. George's eyes harden slightly. And you're forgetting who's in command. Dan stares at him for a long moment before leaving. But now, he's certain. George brought them here for another reason. The discovery. Later that afternoon, Jilly and Matt search an old medical research facility attached to the underground station. Dust covers everything. Computers dead for centuries line the walls. Jilly quietly examines old patient records while Matt restores emergency power. Lights flicker weakly overhead. Then, a monitor suddenly crackles to life. Open quote, archived log found, close quote, Matt blinks. The file date appears. Year 2471, over 1,000 years old. Jilly presses play, fills the screen. Then George appears, younger, healthier, but unmistakably him. Jilly freezes. What? The George on screen wears a dark research uniform marked with a symbol, Genesis Program. Behind him, alarms blare faintly. Video log, Dr. George Hims. George in the recording looks exhausted, panicked. Open quote, the adaptation trials are unstable. Subjects are mutating faster than predicted. Close quote. Matt stares wide-eyed. On screen, George continues. Open quote, the radiation should have killed them, but the serum is rewriting human DNA. Close quote. Jilly slowly backs away from the screen. No. The recording glitches briefly. Then another voice off camera shouts, open quote, they're escaping containment. Close quote. Screaming erupts somewhere behind the camera. George turns sharply. Fear flashes across his face. Real fear. Open quote. If this gets out, Earth is finished. Close quote. The video distorts violently, then stabilizes one final time. George leans close to the camera, his voice quieter now. Cold. Open quote. We tell the colonies the radiation caused this. Nothing else survives. Close quote. The screen cuts to black. Silence. Matt looks sick. Jilly whispers, he created them. The argument. Back aboard the Astra 9. Dan watches the video in stunned silence. Then again. And again. By the third viewing, his hands are shaking with anger. George enters the cabin. The moment he sees the screen, everything changes. Dan stands instantly. You lied to every single one of us. George's face darkens. Where did you find that? You made those things. Julie and Mandy rush in after hearing shouting. Matt follows behind them nervously. Dan slams the console. People died because of you. George fires back immediately. People survived because of me. Silence crashes into the room. Even George seems surprised he said it aloud. Dan steps closer. You experimented on human beings. They volunteered. They turned into monsters. George suddenly explodes. They were dying. Everyone freezes. George's breathing becomes uneven. Years of buried guilt finally breaking through. The world was collapsing, he says bitterly. Radiation storms, famine, extinction. We had no choice. Jilly stares at him in horror. You altered humanity. George looks toward the storm outside. We adapted humanity. Mandy steps forward slowly. My son, George can't meet her eyes. That tells her everything. Tears well instantly. You did this to him. George says nothing. And somehow, that's worse. The warning. Suddenly, the ship lights flicker violently. Matt rushes to the controls. Something's interfering with the systems. Outside the ship, shapes begin emerging from the ruins. Not dozens, hundreds. Howls rise into the storm. But among them, one figure walks slowly toward the ship, tall, wrapped in torn fabric, almost regal. The other mutants part around it, its glowing eyes locked directly onto George through the cockpit glass. Then it speaks, clear enough for everyone to hear. Open quote, "Father," close quote. George's face drains of color. Julie whispers, "What is that?" The figure tilts its head slightly. Not animal, not human, something between. And then it smiles. End of episode 3.